Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
Now then, while Andrew's been busy preparing the soup, I've been in the background and I've been weighing and measuring just a few items ready for one of our cakes this afternoon. Because at this time of the year, as the nights get shorter and it starts to get colder, we start to want to be comfortable. And one way that we like to be comfortable is to have a good hot drink and a nice piece of sweet cake to go with it. So what I've got here is a very old recipe that comes from one of the islands of the British Isles, from the Isle of Man, and it's from my cousin. So this is Mrs. Kinvig's Manx bun loaf. And it's a type of Christmas cake traditionally made when people found that ingredients were very expensive, so they wanted something tasty, but something that wasn't going to be beyond their budget. And this is a cake that I make very, very frequently. I think it's absolutely delicious, and I'm hoping that you're going to think the same when you've made it. I've already weighed out 200 grams of self-raising flour, and I've put a pinch of salt in. I don't have a mixing bowl big enough, so I'm just using a saucepan. I just, as people would have done years ago, I use whatever I've got. Hiding. This recipe is very unfussy, so that if you happen to use 10 grams more or less of something, the recipe is still going to work. And what I'm using is, to my 200 grams of flour, I'm using half a standard pack of butter, so that's 125 grams. There's no laborious whisking and creaming involved in this recipe, it's very simple. All I'm doing is chopping the butter up, and then I'm going to rub it in. So it's nice and easy, and really quite a sort of soothing thing to do. One of the things I find about winter weather and being in the kitchen is the comfort of the warmth and the comfort of the smell. Because there's nothing like the smell of butter and sugar and spices all mixing together in the oven. And all I'm doing here is just rubbing this in with the tips of the fingers, so we're going to end up with something that looks a bit like breadcrumbs. And if it's a bit lumpy, it doesn't matter, it's absolutely fine. As my cousin Mrs. Kinvig at this stage would have 6 children bracketing around the kitchen and the dog, so she had to be fairly relaxed about these things. And this just takes just a few minutes because again people would be very busy. They run a farm, so she's got hens to feed and cattle to go out and sort, and cheese to make in fact. So she hasn't got a lot of time to spend in the kitchen, so it's got to be quick, easy, but very tasty. And there we are, after just a few minutes of doing all of that, what we've now got is a pan full of what looks like breadcrumbs. If you're not certain if you've done this properly, shake your pan or your bowl, and any really big bits come up to the surface. I found a bit here, so I can just rub those a little bit more to make certain that I've got it nice and even. And that's that. Okay. So I've now got a nicely rubbed in mixture here of my 200 grams of flour and my 125 grams of butter. So I'm now ready to start to add the other ingredients, and this is where it really does start to smell like Christmas. I'm using ground mixed spice. I bought this fresh this morning from our local supermarket where it was on special offer. It was 8p, so that's going to be good. Traditionally, spice was very, very expensive, so people saved it up for special occasions like a Christmas or a wedding or a christening. So that's why we would have these special sort of dark fruit cakes for these occasions that we still have today. I'm putting in 2 heaped spoonfuls of mixed spice because I want this to be really nice and spicy. And in earlier times that would be classed as very luxurious because spice was actually more expensive than gold. So I've added that and I've just mixed that in with my fingers. I've now also got 125 grams of sugar. I'm using dark brown sugar. It's got a wonderful smell. It is a bit more expensive. This recipe will work just as well if you use ordinary sugar. The cake will be a little bit lighter, but it will work perfectly well. I'm just being really luxurious here. So I've got 125 grams of sugar put in, and dark brown sugar needs to be slightly rubbed in again, just because it tends to form lumps. So again, just like I've done with the butter, I'm just rubbing this in to make certain there are no lumps. But if I miss any, and there's a nice lump of molten sugar in the slice of cake I get later, I'll not be too unhappy about that, because it will once again just taste delicious. So we've put all of that in. So that's the basic mixture. Now we're going to add dried fruit. And you can really add what you like. I tend to buy mixed fruit from the supermarket or from somewhere like the Ranger Market. And what I've got here, because it was on special offer, was a 500 gram pack of luxury mixed dried fruit. So it's got sultanas, currants, raisins, little bits of citrus peel and little bits of pineapple. Yeah, pineapple, delicious. So I put the whole bag in. And again, just mix this in. I could have done with a bit of a bigger pan to mix this in, but you have what you have. So I'm happy with that. Just mix it together. It's not at all fussy. Make certain that there's any, oh, that's a whole cherry, so that's going to be somebody's lucky slice. If you just make certain there are no sort of lumps of fruit stuck together, that's all. So we've now got something that looks like that. Nice, lovely dark colour, and the smell is wonderful. Now the final bit. That's another cherry I've just found. Right, the final bit, 2 eggs. I go to the supermarket, my cousin steps out of the door to our hen house and goes to see what's available. But on this occasion, supermarket medium eggs will be absolutely fine. So just 2 of those. If I wasn't in a hurry, I would break each one separately in a cup, just to make certain it was absolutely fresh. But I just trusted the supermarket on this occasion. And now, with a wooden spoon, I'm just going to start to mix this together. What I want is a very, very stiff mixture, because you can then treat this mixture in a number of different ways. So use a little bit of milk. There's no milk gone. So just a little bit of milk, so that the mixture will come together really well. That is probably going to be about enough. Again, it'll vary from one batch of flour to another, so nothing's too fixed, but it's gradually coming together. Just mould it together like this. It's looking good. And it's almost like a dough at this stage. The origins of this sort of recipe would be that people would have some bread dough, and at Christmas they'd mix a bit of fruit in it that they'd saved just for a sort of celebration. So it's got that sort of idea. So what we've now got is a really stiff dough like that, where if I hold it like that, I've got to knock the spoon hard on the pan to get it off. Right, so it's a really stiff, resistant mixture. What I'm doing next is I'm going to spread it out into a tin. Depending on the type of tin you use, will depend on how long it takes to cook. I'm using a sort of shallowish, ordinary sort of roasting tin here. Very often I'll use small loaf tins. This is called a 1 pound size of loaf tin, and this mixture's enough for 2 of those. Or you could use 1 bigger loaf tin and have 1 cake. But for this quantity, it will give me 2 of those, or it will give me this tin that I'm going to use now. I've preheated my oven to 170 centigrade, which is gas mark 3, and I have buttered the tin, and then I've just lined it with greaseproof paper. Because of the amount of fruit in it, it can stick, and it's easier to get out with the greaseproof paper. And all I do now is to tip the mixture into the tin. As you can see, it's really, really stiff. And what I'm then going to do is to spread it out with a tablespoon. That's it. So I've got a tablespoon here handy, and I'm just going to spread it out. And I think this mixture, I'm going to give it about 40 minutes, and then I'm going to have a look at it. It should be done by then. In the loaf tin, because the loaf tin is deeper, the mixture tends to take about an hour and 10 minutes. If you do it in a bigger loaf tin, it takes about an hour and a half. Still at the same temperature of gas Mark III or 170 centigrade. I've just evened it out like that. It won't rise hugely because it's such a dense mixture, but you don't want it to. You want it to be a nice sort of solid thing. What you can do with this type of mixture, if you don't want your oven on for that amount of time, is you can take spoonfuls of it in floured hands and pat them a bit like a scone and put them onto a greased baking sheet. And they would cook in 15, 18 minutes, something like that. And that would be a really old-fashioned thing to do. Years ago, before we had proper cake tins, people would have a stiff cake mixture like this and just use their hands to form it into shapes. And that can be very attractive, and children like them if you then sprinkle it with a bit of ice and sugar. But I'm going to just leave it like that at the moment in its tin, and it will now go in to my oven at 170 for... I'm going to start at 35 minutes and see what it looks like then, so we'll have a look shortly. Now I can go off and do other things. Okay, so what we're looking at next is for pudding, after Andrew's delicious soup, and there will be some soda bread being made for that as well, which I'll show you in a few minutes. I'm going to start with apple crumble. I've just got myself a reasonable sized dish, whatever you've got available. Earlier on, I cooked some Bramley apples, and I just wanted to talk about these. They don't know about these in France and Germany and so on. They'll only ever have eating apples. But we have these apples. They're quite often bigger than this, but this characteristic shape. Cooking apples, Bramleys, quite a sour sort of taste, but absolutely ideal for things like apple crumbles and apple pies, because you can control the amount of sweetness that you put into it. So I stewed them with about a tablespoonful of water, and then I added sugar to taste because I wanted them still to be quite tangy. So I just sprinkled some sugar from the packet over the top of them until I had it the way I wanted it. What happens with Bramley apples compared to eating apples is that they go pulpy, like this. And again, you can control how much of a pulp you get. So I've left them so they've got bits of whole apple slice still in there, but mostly it's pulp. So I'm going to spread this into the bottom of my dish. And it took about 10 minutes on a low light to get the apples into this particular state. You can, if you wish to, just leave them raw in the dish, but I find the crumble mixture falls between the slices, and I want the crumble mixture to have a nice even topping, so that's why I've cooked them. They are very nice just eaten on their own, of course, with ice cream or that English old-fashioned standby carnation evaporated milk, which I can eat by the canful. I think it's wonderful. What I've now got also is again 200 grams of flour. For a crumble, it really doesn't matter if it's plain or self-raising. I had self-raising flour, so that's what I've used. But again, this is not a fussy recipe. And I've added now to my 200 grams of flour, quarter of a pack of butter, so that's about 65 grams. By the way, you can use butter or hard margarine like stork. I don't recommend for any of these recipes that you use spreadable margarine, because in order to make it spreadable, they fill it full of water. And what you find is that your cake mixture goes soggy. So you're better sticking with pure fat like butter, or as I say, block margarine. In this case, the butter was on special offer, so I went with butter. If you use stock margarine or a supermarket's equivalent, it still tastes fine. I'm feeling a bit luxurious since we're heading up towards Christmas. So I'm just, again, rubbing this in, very simple, quick and easy, and I just want it to look a bit like breadcrumbs. I added, by the way, just a pinch of salt to this, and also, I should have said, to the bun loaf recipe, because I just think it helps to bring out the flavours of everything. At one time, salt was very expensive, like spices, and really should be used like that when we cook. I know it's bad for our health to have too much salt, but if you think of it as an expensive spice, then I think you pretty well get it about right. So I've just mixed all this in, taken just a few moments, shaken the bowl again. A couple of bigger bits, so I'll just attend to those. So it's just the same technique as for the cake. So I've done that, and now I'm just going to add 60 grams of, again, dark brown sugar, because that's what I had. I could use ordinary sugar, could use whatever I like, Demerara, doesn't matter. Each one will give you a slightly different result, but they're all equally delicious. With this sort of crumble topping, you could add some dried fruit, you could add some porridge oats, or some seeds. It's whatever you prefer. The recipe is not fussy. You can adapt it and serve up lots of delicious varieties. But this one's fairly plain. The little bits of sugar in this, here's a lovely one right at the surface, will melt to become sort of little nuggets of deliciousness when it's in the oven. So that's fine. So having done that, that's taken me just a couple of minutes, hasn't it? I'm now going to spread this over the top of the apple mixture. And then just smooth it off. And that's it. Very simple, very easy. This is going to bake at 190 to 200 for about 25 minutes. So I'm putting that in my top oven here. Do that for about 25 minutes. Now then, Andrew's soup is simmering nicely here, but do you want to have a look at it, Andrew, or shall I carry on with the soda bread? Right, okay, I'm going to carry on with the soda bread. I'm just going to rinse this bowl out. Because it's all had dry ingredients in it, then I'm simply going to, in fact, just wipe it out with a clean, dry cloth. Right, soda bread. I remember years ago there was a bread strike. The bakers went on strike, and there were lots and lots of people looking panicked. And I remember my mother saying, "What on earth are they panicking for? We can make bread at home." Soda bread is a quick and easy recipe. I'm just going to move towards the scales. There's a lovely set of electronic scales which work ever so well when you know what you're doing. Just have to wait for them to 0. And now fighting with me slightly. That's it. And again, I'm going to use 200 grams. So I'm just measuring out 200 grams of self-raising flour. If you look at recipes for soda bread, you'll find there's lots of talk about bicarbonate of soda and having to buy buttermilk or sour milk for yourself. You don't need to. You just use self-raising flour. It gives you exactly the same result. And in fact, I think self-raising flour the bread tastes a bit nicer. With that amount of flour, I'm going to use, and this is just ordinary salt, I'm going to use about half a teaspoon of salt. Any more than that, it tastes a bit sharp, but about half a teaspoon of salt, so that goes in there. And again, I'm just going to mix that around with my fingers. Right? Simple as that. To that, I'm going to add, on this occasion, some milk. I could use water, depends whatever you've got handy. I'm going to use some milk, it'll give me a slightly softer dough. And I'm going to put enough milk in to make this into a stiff dough. So I'll just put a bit of milk in like that. Just start stirring it around with a knife. I could use my fingers, but I don't want them to be too sticky at this stage. So I'm just going to stir them around. Turn the dough onto it. Get rid of the bowl. And I'm going to knead the dough. So I'm just turning it in on itself a little bit, just very lightly, just to form like a small sort of bread bun. It's round and round and round on itself. I'm not doing a huge amount of kneading because I don't want the recipe to end up tough. Thanks, Andrew. I think the pumpkin might have just been in the way there. That's fine. So I've done that. I've just brought it together. It looks like that. Turn it, flatten it slightly with my hand, and flatten it a bit more so it looks a bit like that. Take a tin or a baking sheet, sprinkle some flour on it, and put it on the baking sheet. And then I'm going to cut a cross in the top, just with a knife. And the Irish people who used to make this would have said, you've got to put a cross in the top to let the fairies out, or else the fairies will jinx your bread and it will not rise. Okay, and we want our bread to rise. By cutting it like that, what you're doing is making certain there's plenty of space within the crust for the whole thing to rise. And I'm going to put that in next to my apple crumble, so it's about 190 or 200, and I'm going to give that about 20 minutes and it'll be ready to come out. So that's soda bread, quick and easy. And that's me done for the moment. I shall leave you back with Andrew with the soup. Right, so we've been having a cup of tea and tidying up, so things have moved position while you've been away, hopefully having your cup of tea. So Andrew's soup is there ready, and it looks like things are ready to come out the oven. So we'll have a look at the crumble and the bread first of all. So here's the crumble, and yeah, I'm happy with that. It's changed colour a bit. I'm just using the grill pan as a cooling tray, by the way, just because it was handy. Yeah, and in fact the apple filling has even started to burst through a little bit. So that's now ready, and we would let that cool a bit and then serve it with something which I'll talk about in a moment. Now the other thing we have here is the soda bread. So I'll take that out. It's risen. It's gone a bit brown on top. Just close that. Get rid of that, I think, for a moment. Sound the noise, and we'll have a look to see if it's done. So all I do is grab hold of it and tip it over, and it makes that slightly hollow sound, so it's ready. So that means I can now put this on a cooling rack, and if I wanted to keep the crust very soft, I would wrap it in a clean tea towel. When you cut it, you can break it into 4 pieces, like 4 scones. I'll just break it in half now. There you are, and it's nice and light on the inside. And you can serve that sliced and buttered. It also makes the most wonderful toast. If you toast it, you'll find that the butter floats on the top like a beautiful molten lake. And then when you eat it, it dribbles down your chin. It's fabulous. Right? And it's also extremely filling. Children will love it. So I would be having slices of that with my soup. And you can put anything on it, cheese, jam, it goes with absolutely everything. Regarding the crumble, I would have that with some ice cream or a tin of evaporated milk, which we said before would be the really sort of old-fashioned way of having it, or some cream. The other idea, just at the quick recipe hint, would be to melt a cube of butter in a saucepan with a tablespoon of flour, pour milk on and heat it up until it starts to thicken. You might need a bit less milk on to begin with, and a bit more to get it to a sort of a sauce-like consistency. Sweeten it up with some sugar, and even put vanilla in. And you've got a very nice sweet white sauce as an alternative to custard. And it costs a few pennies to make. And again, that's really filling and goes extremely well on your apple crumble. The final thing I'm looking at here is the cake. So I'm just going to get that out. And that's looking pretty good as well. How you tell if this sort of cake is done is by pressing the surface. And yeah, it springs back. It doesn't leave a crater, and therefore it's ready. That is a very, very rich mixture, so I would leave that to go cold in the tin before you attempt to take it out or it'll just break. Once it has gone cold, either wrap it in more pieces of paper and foil, or put it into a cake tin with a really secure lid. And if you can bear to keep it for 2 or 3 days before you eat it, it is going to taste very much better. The flavours really do develop, rather like an ordinary fruit cake. if you can keep it for a few days. So that's the Manx bun loaf. Just put that there. I made one a couple of days ago because I knew I couldn't cut into that one today. So here's one that I made in a £1 loaf tin. So it's half the quantity that's in that tray. And as you can see, it ends up as quite a firm consistency. I've still got its greaseproof paper on the bottom. I'm just going to cut across the middle of that now so that you can see it. And what you get here is a really firm consistency. You can cut nice slices of that, have it plain or have it buttered, and it's absolutely delicious with a good cup of hot tea on a cold winter afternoon. Just the sort of thing to keep you cheerful. So we hope that we've given you some ideas there for really a full meal, and even more than that because the soup will last more than one meal. Some quick and easy ideas. They're not expensive to make, they're not difficult to make, but they are extremely tasty, and the family will keep